All right, we're live on Facebook. Good morning, good morning, good morning. My name is Scott Groves. I work for Mortgage Movement Mortgage, but if you're watching this, you probably already knew that. Getting a lot of questions about, hey, are we in a housing bubble? Scott, should I be buying right now? Scott, is my realtor just pushing me to make a higher offer because they make more commission? Like it's really weird how the clients that we work with will frequently think that I have the better answer because I'm the finance guy or the math guy. And so I just wanted to bring in, some conversation today to actually look at the underlying stats and math of, are we in a housing bubble? And we're going to talk about even what that means, how you define that, how you define affordability. And by the way, if you're watching this on Facebook or you're watching the replay or you're watching somewhere where this video got shared, do me a favor and just click the like button, leave a comment, because that really helps the algorithm to help other clients and realtors see the video. Obviously, I'm a loan officer. I'm not just going to pitch you for half an hour, but I want to do your loan. So if you're seeing this and you're a realtor, I want to be working with you to pre-approve your clients. And if you're a buyer who's thinking about buying some point in the future, really anywhere in the nation, because our team is licensed in 12 states. And then we've got loan officer partners in every state in the union. So anywhere you're thinking about buying or refinancing, we'd love to help you. Okay, cool. On to the presentation, and let's go here, because I'm prepared for this one. We actually prepared some slides. So let's prepare Microsoft PowerPoint. There we go. If I can just get a confirmation that you can actually see the screen. So in the chat box, if you're here on Zoom, I'm guessing on Facebook, we'll be able to see here shortly if you can actually see it. If you just give me a thumbs up in the chat box that you can actually see the screen and that you are currently seeing, are we in a housing bubble? Yes, okay, cool. So are we in a housing bubble, presented by Scott Groves? That's me. In fairness, I just want to give credit to one of my mentors and somebody in the industry I look up to, Barry Habib. He runs a company called MBS Highway, and MBS Highway is probably the go-to source for loan officers to understand the market, understand interest rates. So a lot of stuff that I'm going to be going over today is stuff that I've completely verbatim ripped off from him. So shout out to Barry Habib if he is watching this or anybody's checking this out. So let's kind of go to this first slide. So, when people say, oh, are we in a housing bubble? What they really mean, or the question they're really asking is, are property values going to go down, right? Are property values going to go down? And spoiler alert, I gave this same exact presentation with a couple different slides back in 2014, 2015 to a group of probably about 40 realtors at a lunch. I remember it was Desert Rose. It was when I was the in-house lender at Prudential, which has since become Home Services Lending, or Home Services Real Estate, Home Services Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate of California. They have the worst name. But anyway, I digress. So I gave this presentation like 2014, 2015. We had about 40 realtors at Desert Rose in Los Feliz, California. And I said, hey, I kind of polled the audience. How many of you feel that we're kind of a little top heavy on the market? Prices are a little bit out of control. Things are a little overpriced and expensive. And about 35 out of 40 realtors raised their hand and said, oh yeah, it feels a little expensive. Ooh, man, some of these neighborhoods where you could have picked up a house a couple years ago for $300,000 or $400,000 are now $500,000 or $600,000. And we went over all this math and we went over these slides. And what we came to realize kind of cumulatively as a team is that the market had a long way to run, right, as far as price appreciation. And not surprisingly, in a lot of those neighborhoods that myself and those realtors service, whether that be, Echo Park, West Hollywood, Eagle Rock, farther north in places like Valencia, not surprisingly, the average starting home now is at $800,000, $900,000, $1 million, $1.2 million. So now the question persists, right? Like, are we in a housing bubble? Which really just means, are prices going to go down? And since that meeting in 2014, 2015, I have some clients that check in every few months to update their pre-approval, and they're still waiting for the bubble to burst, and they're still waiting for property values to go down. And they've lost out, had they bought in 2015, 16, 17, they've lost out on like a 20, 30, or 40% appreciation in the market. It's crazy, right? So I just wanted to go over this slide of what what affects house prices? So in the middle of the slide, we've got house prices, and you can see below the line in the kind of blue outlines is the supply side of the equation, meaning like how many homes are selling, how many people are putting their houses on the market. What is the supply of housing, meaning that combination of sellers and new construction? And if you're in a major metropolitan area, whether that's Los Angeles, California, Austin, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, Miami, Florida, we all know that there's a lack of inventory. I didn't even bother to put a slide in this deck on the lack of inventory because we all know it to be true. There's not enough people selling their houses, and whether it's because of environmental regulation or bad local housing authorities and housing policy with the local governments, or whether it's concerns from developers, there's simply not enough new houses being built to keep up with the demand, which is above the line on this slide. And those are the things in the green. There's just simply not enough supply keeping up with the demand. So if you look at Generation X, Generation Y, pretty soon Generation Z, all wanting to buy houses, all forming households, meaning they're leaving their parents' house, or they're getting married, or they're having babies, or they want a house where their dog can hang out in the backyard. We're seeing more household formations than there are houses available. So not surprisingly, that's going to cause prices to go up. Now, if we think about affordability and we think about what could cause prices to go down, which is really the definition of like the housing bubble burst, I don't see anything on this slide that's going to cause prices to go down. So if we look at the supply side, I don't see anything happening in the market that could make just a huge swath of sellers say, okay, cool, now we want to sell our house, right? It doesn't seem like any local municipalities are lowering their standards and their guidelines for new construction or making it cheaper for developers to build houses. Anecdotally, I have a friend here in Los Angeles, California, who's a developer, and he'll buy like two houses that are next to each other. He'll scrape the lot, means take it down to the dirt, and then he'll build small unit subdivisions, small house subdivisions. And what that is basically, it kind of looks like a condo, it feels like a condo, but there's a 1 or 2 inch air gap in between each unit. So it's considered a single family residence, small lot subdivisions. And he's told me, he's like, with the time that it takes for me to acquire the land, get the plans approved by LA County, fight their ongoing bureaucracy, he's like, I cannot bring a house to the market for under $900,000 or I'm not profitable. And these aren't extravagant palatial estates. These are tiny little houses, 2,000 square feet or so, that are right next to each other, but it's an opportunity to get into the market for under $1 million. And he's like, I can't build a house in Los Angeles for less than $900,000 and have it be profitable. And if you live in an area where prices are lower, you can scale this down to the same thought process. If you're Kaufman and Broad, even if you're building in an area where there's a ton of available land and real estate, they're now getting to the place with building supplies and wait times with local municipalities and fighting the building code. They can't bring on a starter house in certain metropolitan areas or even more rural areas for less than $300,000 or $400,000, or it's just not profitable for them. So I don't see anything changing on the supply side. And then on the demand side, we have low interest rates, economic growth, number of household formation, like all of these things are kind of working in tandem, where I don't really see anything that's going to cause prices to go down and quote unquote the bubble to burst. Okay. So I wanted to go over quickly today, what are the 3 components that constitute affordability and the ability to buy a home? Because remember, if we've got a bunch of households that are forming and we have a bunch of people who want to buy houses, we need to know, can they actually buy houses? And so the 3 things that really go into understanding affordability is 1, the cost of money, aka interest rates, cost of houses, aka the sales price of the actual house, and then the borrower's ability to repay or actually pay that mortgage, aka their actual income. So the challenge is when you watch MSNBC or you watch Fox News or you read anything where they're just trying to sell ads and they're trying to just be a never-ending stream of fear porn and cliffhangers and anything to make you stay watching the news for an extra 30 minutes so they can sell some more ad revenue. They're only going to talk about one of these three categories, right? They're going to cherry pick whatever category has bad news. If interest rates went up a bit, it's all going to be focused about, it's all coming to an end. The housing market's going to crash because interest rates are going up. It's like, all right, well, if that's the case, what is the cost of housing? What is the client's ability to repay? Where are real incomes at? Then, of course, if a report comes out that shows houses are more expensive than they've ever been, because they are, then they'll only focus on that. Oh, affordability of houses are at their worst level in 57 years. And it's like, well, maybe, but what are the other two components? What about the cost of borrowing money to finance that house? What about people's real income, right? And so when we're trying to talk to clients or borrowers, or for you realtors, if you're giving a presentation, it's important to understand these three buckets as it comes to constituting affordability and the ability to buy homes. It's like, yes, you're right, Mr. and Mrs. Client. Houses in Boyle Heights, California are more expensive than they've ever been. And let's talk about the other two components that go into the affordability of being able to buy a house. So let's go to that. Let's go to interest rates first, because this is kind of obviously what I'm passionate about. This is what I kind of know the most about. And when we talk about the ability to buy a house, one of the big components is, where are interest rates, right? What is your cost to finance money or borrow money? And if we look at this 200-year chart of US interest rates, the average has sat right around 5.18%, so call it 5%. And over the last, call it 40 years, since about 1981, when interest rates peaked, the transition between Carter and Reagan. Obviously, we were in like a huge inflationary situation under Carter. Took a while for that to change. Obviously, the booming 80s helped, and interest rates came down due to fiscal policy, due to market forces. In the early 80s, if you were financing a home, you were pretty lucky if you got a rate under 10%, the early 80s, late 70s. So we've basically been in a 40-year downward trend of interest rates. And really, even if you go all the way back to the 200-year trend line, other than this kind of like 1950s to 1980s where inflation got out of control and we kind of had poor monetary policy in America, we've really been on a slow downward slope of interest rates for a couple hundred years. So as the banking system has evolved and as credit has become more of an important capacity, or a more important component of having the capacity to run a modern day economy, interest rates have been kind of on this slow, steady decline for the last 200 years. Again, with things spiking in 1981 and then coming down dramatically over the last 40 years. So if you think of, and I love when this happens, when I have somebody's, parents complaining about, I can't believe Junior's buying a house for $800,000. That's crazy. We bought our first house in the 70s for $47,000. And I'm like, okay, that's relevant, obviously, but that's just one bucket in the equation of buying a house. Yes, you bought it for $47,000, but what was your interest rate? Oh, well, my interest rate was 10%. And how much did you make? Oh, well, I was the CFO of a major company. I did all the accounting. I made $65,000 in the 70s, which was big money in the 70s, but would be kind of white collar starter money today in 2021. So it's important that we look at these three components and we understand, hey, one of the things that we should be focusing on and promoting with our client base is like, yes, properties are expensive. And if your cost to borrow that money is significantly lower than it's ever been in the history of modern economics, is it okay, right? Is it okay to pay a little bit more for a house if it's cheaper to finance? So that's one component of the kind of three different buckets that we're looking at when we look at affordability. So next is the median household income in the US. And again, if you're watching the news, I don't care which version of the news, if you're watching the news, it's going to be nonstop fear porn about who's doing poorly, who's losing money, who's not making a ton of money. Is there income inequality? Are these evil rich people making so much more than your lower tier income employees? Well, if you really just look at the data, right? And I pulled this from the Census Bureau. Unfortunately, the most recent data in 2020 is not available, but I looked that up on another chart and tried to find a way to put it in here, but I'm not so good with this kind of stuff. So you're gonna have to just trust me on this one. But if you look at income down here in 2008, 2009, after the kind of Great Recession, the housing market. Problems start to occur in 2007. It dips, it dips, it dips. Things don't really start to recover until 2011, 2012, because think about it, jobs are cyclical, contracts end and then aren't renewed. Sometimes a company will hang on for a couple of years and keep paying their employees before they either go under, or they have to cut pay, or they have to let employees leave and hire cheaper workers. But in general, we see a downward trend here from kind of this peak around 2006, 2007 at about $59,000 per household. The end of kind of the hangover effects of the Great Recession end around 2011, 2012, things start to stabilize. And then if you see from 2012 to 2019, real household incomes go up almost 30%. Now, if you go back and you do this on inflation-based numbers, I've seen some studies that show that in the last 20 years, real household income has gone up nearly 50%. And it's challenging because I get it. There's a lot of people, especially over the last 18 years, 18 months as we've been dealing with the pandemic. There's a lot of people that are legitimately suffering, and there's a lot of people that don't feel like they have a toehold in the market, and they're not getting where they want to get financially. But if you look at the overall data and you just look at, hey, what are households actually doing? It's been a really impressive run over the last 10 years of an increase of household income. And I'm going to get to a couple examples on that. But I just want you to know, this is kind of this is the median, meaning there's a lot of people below the line and above the line. But in general, if you just look at overall household income over the last 10 years, America is crushing it. And this is something that only gets talked about when it's politically beneficial for one party or another party. But if you just take a step back and you stop watching the news and we stop being scared and we stop listening to politicians, which is something I desperately need to do, we'll see that okay, cool, we're just looking at massive growth in income, right? And so I wanted to show this because a lot of you watching are here in California. This is wage growth since 2010 across 2020. So the bottom axis is 2010 through 2020. The right-hand side axis is kind of incomes from 60,000 to 80,000. Again, California, depending on what stats you read, depending on whether you're going off the Census Bureau, the California Bureau, all kinds of different stats I pulled out. But in general, it's looking like there's about a 25 to 35% increase of real household income for Californians. Obviously, in 2020, we saw a drop because there was a lot of people who were forced to be unemployed due to the pandemic. The good news is the kind of year-to-date numbers on 2021 show that this is going to rebound pretty quickly. So, if you just look at this, like nearly a $20,000 per household growth in real income, which not surprisingly, people are making more money. They're willing to spend more money on housing, right? So we go back to those three buckets. Are houses expensive? Yes. But are interest rates low and it allows people to finance more of a house? Yes. Are incomes higher, which allow people to pay for more expensive housing? Yes. So we've got kind of two out of the three buckets moving in our favor still. Now, a lot of people will say, this last point, I probably should have put it first, but I don't feel rich, right? I don't feel rich. Yes, yeah, I understand, Scott. I'm making more money than I ever thought I was going to make. I never thought I'd make $150,000 a year as a realtor, or I never thought I'd make $75,000 a year as a graphic designer, or I never thought I'd make, $65,000 a year being middle management at the Gap clothing store, right? But I don't feel rich because I don't feel like my money goes particularly as far as I'd like it to, nor do I currently feel in a position where I can pay off all my debt or buy a house. Well, that's due to this ugly term called inflation. And inflation, the simplest definition of inflation is just too much money chasing too few goods, right? So if we go back to our, high school or college economics 101, if you have too much money in the marketplace, meaning too much demand, and there's not enough goods for that money to purchase, well, then the price of those goods goes up, right? So if you have X amount of dollars chasing X amount of food, but there's a lot more money chasing the food, then the price of food goes up. If you have way too many buyers and way too much money in the marketplace, whether it's there because people are earning it or whether it's there because the government is pumping stimulus into the economy, however the money got there, if there's too much money chasing too few goods, then you're going to have price increases, right? So that's why somebody that is working in a profession where maybe they never thought in their wildest dreams they'd be making $100,000 a year doesn't feel rich making $100,000 a year because the cost of housing, the cost of food, the cost of a pair of jeans, the cost of electronics has gone up due to inflation. And this is something that, we need to consider. And I'm not making a statement whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. A lot of your opinion on this will probably rest on where you fall politically. But think of this. In the last 18 months since the beginning of the pandemic, 40% of all the US dollars in existence were printed. So I was going to show this really cool infographic on how the money works, and it goes through the Treasury into the Federal Reserve and whatnot. But remember, the government has the ability to print money. They can literally print money and say, we need some stimulus into the economy. We are going to print this money. We're going to get it out into the economy through different channels, and that will help prop up spending, that will help to prop up lending, that will help to prop up kind of the velocity of money chasing consumer goods. But if you want to talk about inflation, too much money chasing too few goods, we have to be realistic and honest about the situation that 40% of all the dollars that are currently in the US economy got printed and pushed out into the market into the last 18 months. So I'm kind of surprised that the prices of housing let me rephrase this. I'm surprised that housing isn't more expensive, because if you had a major global event, say a pandemic, and the government printed 40% more money that was ever in circulation, ever in the history of the country, you would kind of expect things to get more expensive, right? And just right now, this week, there's a new consideration of a new, call it 3 trillion, 4 trillion. These numbers are so big, who can even keep track of them? There's a new proposal on the table, which will probably pass, to pump even more stimulus money, infrastructure spending, green spending into the economy. And not surprisingly, for the foreseeable future, it looks like we're going to have more and more and more and more money going into the economy, which again creates inflation, which is defined by too much money chasing too few goods, right? So we injected 40% into the money supply into the country, but we didn't build 40% more housing. As a matter of fact, housing starts are pretty slow right now because of the fact that construction costs are high, and also labor is kind of hard to come by because a lot of people were either scared to go back to work because of the pandemic, they were on unemployment, making bonus money with the $300 extra weekly stipend. Like, we're actually seeing housing starts be down. Housing starts being the pace of which new construction and new houses are coming to market. So, no opinion one way or another whether this is good or not. But if we're talking to our clients, we're like, well, I'm just going to wait till January of next year. I'm going to wait 2 more years because, the bubble is going to burst and housing is going to be way less expensive in 2022 or 2023. It's like, first of all, I've been hearing the same thing since 2015. And second of all, if you really understand this kind of triangle of interest rates, housing prices, affordability, and then the ability to earn to repay the ability to repay your mortgage, you can see that there's a lot of pressure on 2 of these 3 buckets, right? The government is spending more money than ever, so they have a interest in keeping interest rates as low as possible. So it feels like there's going to continue to be downward pressure on interest rates. And if they're pumping all this money into the equation, the price of houses are going to go up, but that's also going to cause incomes to come up, right? Because inflation causes the price of goods to go up, but it also causes salaries and incomes to rise. So that might be why you don't feel rich, even though you're making more money than ever, right? I put this in kind of just as a supplementary slide. This is kind of a graph of US housing prices in comparison to what the S&P 500 does. So this is kind of tracking what do home values do in comparison to the housing market and your return on investment on the housing market. And what's crazy is that the housing market has done amazing over the last, what's the time frame on this? 55 years, or this was the last 40 years, and it's gone nowhere but up since now. Let's just Google that real quick. What is the S&P 500 today? S&P S S&P 500 today. This chart's actually a little out of date. S&P 500. Yeah, okay. So the last 5 years, we obviously know this stopped in 2015, and shame on me, I didn't double check the bottom axis here. But this stopped with the S&P 500 being at almost 2,600. It's at 4,400 today, which that number is kind of irrelevant other than the fact that it's a number that you can use to track from day to day, week to week, year to year to kind of see the overall health of the stock market. But as housing pricing has gone up, so has the investment portfolio of virtually any client who can afford to buy a house. So any client I've ever done a loan for has some type of stock portfolio or 401k, or they have some amount of money in the market. And I just wanted to show this to be like, well, you might not feel rich, but you might actually be rich, right? It's always funny to me when I talk to clients who are making X amount of dollars, and they're either complaining about how much better they could be doing, or how much money they wish they had, or the evil person that they saw on the nightly news who didn't pay their fair share of taxes. And I'm like, yeah, but you get it. Like, you're rich also, right? You're making X amount of dollars and you have X amount of savings, and you're buying a $800,000 house or a $2 million house or a $500,000 house. That kind of in many ways makes you rich as well. So just, bringing some context to the conversation so people can kind of understand, are we in this housing bubble, or is it like everybody's kind of better off together and things are just getting more expensive, right? So I just wanted to point out that people have selective memory, right? A lot of people, especially here in Southern California, are making more money. They have more assets. Interest rates are lower, so therefore they actually have more purchasing power, right? I remember 20 years ago, 22 years ago, when I started, 21 years ago, when I started at Washington Mutual, I had a friend named Jason Lee, and he was the financial planner at our branch. And he was like, yeah, it's really funny, man. People have selective memory, and they don't think about the power of compound interest, meaning saving money, because he was always trying to talk people into investing early. And they don't understand the destructive power of inflation. And I was in my early 20s. I didn't understand either. I'm like, Jason, what do you mean? He's like, well, I've got these clients who, like, in 2001, he said, I got these clients who 10 years ago bought $1 million of life insurance. And they're like, wow, $1 million of life insurance. Like, if I die, somebody's going to get $1 million. And then I have to sit down and remind them, hey, you've got X amount of money in the bank. You're making X amount of income. You own real estate totaling X amount of dollars. That $1 million in life insurance doesn't go a long way. And this was 20 years we talked about that now. For example, if you live in Southern California and you have $1 million life insurance policy, and God forbid something happens, maybe you pay off the house, pay off some debts, pay off the car, and there's a little bit of a nest egg left over for the people you care about. In life insurance planning, you're supposed to have like enough money to get your kids through college and your spouse to, their death in retirement. So it's interesting how we all kind of have these benchmarks in our head of like, this is a lot of money, or this is spending a lot of money. And this happens in real estate, right? People say, oh, well, that's so much money for that house. It's like, yes, it is. And maybe we're having selective memory because when you got out of college, did you really think you were going to make X amount of doing Y type of job? And did you ever think that you'd have, $100,000, $50,000, $250,000 to put down on a house? So we just need to keep bringing people back to, yes, I understand you have this mental block because you either haven't bought a house yet, or you haven't upgraded and bought your dream house. So there's this like frustration over the cost of housing. But you also have to think about, okay, well, what am I earning? What do I have in assets? What do I have for a down payment? What am I getting from gift funds for a family member, right? And then put it all together and be like, oh, in addition to the fact that I'm making more money, I have more money down, interest rates are still really low, and we're able to buy things and afford things. And that kind of takes us to this affordability slide. So this is kind of my argument that homeownership is not getting more expensive. So you're gonna have to follow the math here, but I think the lesson is good if we can get to the end. So in 2006, here in Southern California, let's say you were looking at a house for $400,000, and the 30-year fixed interest rate was about 5%. Your monthly payment would have been $2,150. And I'm for the simplicity of this chart, I'm assuming you put no money down, and I'm not worried about taxes and insurance, because taxes and insurance on your house are going to do whatever they're going to do. But in this example, 2006, you were looking at a $400,000 house, maybe in Burbank, California, at 5%, and the monthly payment was $2,150. At the time, in order to qualify for that $400,000 house, maybe you were making about $6,000 in household income. So your household was making $72,000 a year. Now, if we compare your mortgage payment in relationship to your income, you had about, in this example, 33% of your income going towards your housing expense. And this was a very common scenario I saw in the early to mid 2000s when I was doing loans in Burbank, California at Washington Mutual. Rest in peace, Washington Mutual, by the way. So now you fast forward to 2021 and you're like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Like that same house that was $400,000 just 15 years ago, now it's $800,000. Well, this is true, right? Because across the United States in the last 15 years, we've seen about a 41% appreciation of all real estate. In some areas like, Austin, Texas, Southern California, a lot of really hot metropolitan areas, we've seen even more than that, 50, 60% increases in housing. But let's just say in my example, the national average is about 41%, even though there's not a lot of deals out there in the marketplace because it's kind of a seller's market because there's not enough inventory. Let's just assume a house that you could have bought 15 years ago has doubled in value, and which is astronomical, 100% increase in value. But we've seen that happen in some neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Now, remember, the national average is much lower than this. It's about 41%, but I don't care. Let's swing for the fences and say that like in your area, housing has gotten 100% more expensive in the last 15 years. Obviously, if you timed the market perfectly and you bought in 2008, 2009, you got a great deal on the house. Good for you. I'm super happy for you. But that's, an 18-month window in the history of housing in the American economy. So we can't really benchmark what we could have got in 2009 to where things are today. That's kind of like saying, man, I could have bought Apple stock back when it was $4 before Steve Jobs came back to Apple. Well, okay, if you want to wait around to buy Apple stock at $4 a share, I think you're going to be waiting a really, really, really long time. So let's say property values doubled and you now have an $800,000 mortgage at a rate, right now we're somewhere around 2.99, 2.875, depending on the day. Your monthly payment would be $33.68. Obviously, my 5-year-old could tell you that $33.68 is significantly higher than $21.50 as far as a monthly mortgage payment. However, here's the important thing is that since 2006, whether it's because we're more productive or because of inflation or because of the fact that America is more wealthy, whatever we want to say, the average household income since 2006, and this is directly from the US Census, this is not a partisan study, this is not something I pulled out of my ass, real household income has gone up about 55%. So that same person that was earning $6,000 in 2006, if they stayed the course, if they stayed in their profession, they're making on average about $9,300 now. So if we compare their monthly mortgage payment, their monthly housing cost of $33.68 to their household income of $9,300, about 29% of their income is going towards their mortgage and their expensive housing. So as a percentage basis of their income, things are actually getting better than they were in 2006, 2007, 2008. Now, 2008, 2009, you can start to get a really great deal on houses, but also, as we notice from the graph or the bar chart a few slides back, incomes were also way down in 2009, 2010, 2011. So, a large portion of people's income was still going towards housing. So I just want to show this example of like, yes, the houses are getting more expensive, but also, yes, rates are lower and incomes are higher. So as a percentage of income, about the same amount of money is going to the housing cost, which is why we can still approve people for loans, right? Whether I go back to my very first loan I did at the end of the year in 2000, or I go to the pre-approval that I just processed this weekend, it's shocking to me how many clients intrinsically know, like, oh, I think I'm going to buy a house around 400,000 or 4 million. And that ends up eating about 35 to 40% of their income up. People just kind of know they can do like Kentucky windage. They know they can ballpark it on like, yeah, I think I can afford about this amount of house, right? And I'm shocked how many times people know upfront before we even have a conversation, kind of what price range they can be in versus how much money they make. And I extrapolated out this example on one more slide for those of us that work in really high cost areas like Southern California. Let's say, again, 2006, you had a $700,000 house at 5%, monthly payment of $3,757, household income, right? Because if you could qualify for a $700,000 loan traditionally back in 2006, you had to be making about 110, 120 grand a year. That was 40% of your income going towards your housing expense. Again, home appreciation in America is up 41%, but I just wanted to use the extreme example of, let's say that $700,000 house in Eagle Rock, California that you could have gotten in 2006 is now 1.4 million. That feels like, holy cow, I never thought I would spend $1.4 million on a house. However, again, interest rates lower, payment of $5,894 feels like a really big payment. But if you're in that same demographic, AKA working in America, you've seen about a 55% increase to your income. And real incomes are somewhere around 17,000. You're now looking at something around a 34% of your income going towards your mortgage payment. And again, I changed around some of these stats to better fit like the California market, because most of my realtors are working here in California. But even if we go over the averages, it all kind of dovetails into this fact of like housing is still affordable, right? And so I was thinking to myself after I put together this presentation, and I'm like, well, trust me, I would love for housing prices to go down. I've done really well over the last 10 years. Most loan officers have done really well over the last 10 years. I would love for the cost of housing to go down so I can pick up a couple of rental properties. I would love, because we basically get paid on the ability for there to be more transactions in the market. I would love for demand to go down and supply to go up and have a lot more transactions in the market, because I would do more transactions and therefore I'd make more money. I'm very biased towards wanting to have housing prices go down, but I don't think they're going to. And so after I put this all together, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, well, what if I'm totally wrong, right? What if I'm full of shit and this is all wrong and there's some monster under the bed that's going to lead to another 2009? So I brought up this property at 2629 Roseview. This house is near and dear to my heart because this used to be my house. And in December of 2007, literally the worst possible month to buy a house in American history, I bought this house in Glassell Park, Cypress Park area of Los Angeles, which was kind of a working class community, a place where a lot of people did not want to own back in 2007. I bought this house for $375,000. And I bought it off market because I bought it from a family friend and we closed off market. So that's why you don't see the number here listed at 375. But I can tell you that's what I paid for it, 375,000. About a year and a half later, Zillow showed that this house was worth 180 grand. I had lost 50% of the value based on what I had paid for it at the absolute top of the market. Okay. And I wish I would have known then what I know now is, don't wait to buy a house, just buy a house and wait. Because in any 10-year period in the history of housing in America, there is no 10-year period where real estate didn't make money. And this property, in my experience, is a testament to this. I bought this for $375 in 2007. It immediately went to dog doo-doo and was worth 50% of what I bought. And then 8 years later, I clawed and scratched, and there was like 6 months where I was living on a buddy's couch, renting this house out so I didn't lose it into foreclosure. About 7.5 years later, in 2015, I listed it for $399 and sold it in like a flurry of multiple offers for $523. And when I mentioned that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation how I did that luncheon with 40 realtors in 2015 at this Desert Rose restaurant and talked about, hey, do we feel like property values kind of at the top of its range or a little bit more expensive? My house was one of the ones that was used as an example of like, oh yeah, Scott, you got what? You got 5.25 for your house in Glassell Park? That's crazy. I can't believe somebody was willing to pay for that. I was happy to get rid of the house at the time because it played into my bigger financial plan of getting debt free. And I used the 100 grand that I netted from the sale of the property to pay off a bunch of debt that I was still in from 2008, 2009. However, had I just kept this house another 5 years, I would have made another $400,000 in free money because Zillow currently has the property estimated at $930,000. Now, could we get that? Who knows? Maybe we only get 850, maybe we get 950. But the point is, even if everything I just went over, I'm wrong on, which I think I'm right, because I do believe in that little triangle of housing. Yes, houses are more expensive, but the interest rates are low. The ability to repay, AKA real incomes, are up. We're pumping a ton of money into the economy. So it just doesn't look like property values are going to go anywhere but up. But if I'm completely wrong, and if tomorrow this $900,000 house crashes to a value of $400,000 or $500,000, you've just got to hold, right? You've just got to buy the house and wait. So if you're thinking about buying and selling in a year, hey, anything could go catastrophically wrong. But if you're looking for a house to buy that's going to be a long-term hold, it's going to be a place you and your family are going to live in for 5 to 10 years, or it's part of the long-term portfolio of rental properties you're buying, it's like, it's never a wrong time to buy, right? Don't wait to buy a house and wait. Stole that from my friend David Osborne, who's one of the most prolific property investors I know and one of the wealthiest dudes I know. He's like, hey man, I've made some good choices, I've made some bad choices, I've made some amazing choices that were home runs in the housing market. I've made some catastrophe decisions, but you just hold on and you'll be okay. And make sure you're in a good enough spot and you have a good enough savings and you have an income where you can pay for these things. So that's kind of the end of the slideshow. If anybody's got a question here, I'll try to look quickly at Facebook and I'll try to look here at the Zoom comments. If anybody has a question about this stuff, I'd be happy to answer it. Ooh, let's see if I can go to this question. Oh, no, it'll immediately start answering. Okay, cool. So I can't go to the Facebook Live. But yeah, I really appreciate you watching this presentation, whether you watched it live on Facebook, whether you watched it live here on Zoom, whether you're watching the replay video. Again, I'm a loan officer. That's what I do for a living, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. I also coach loan officers. And I also have a podcast. I'm also trying to be a decent father and husband. So I just don't sleep very much. But if you or your client has a question, if you're getting somebody ready to buy a house and one, they need to be pre-approved, but two, they really need a conversation about what's going on with the market. They're on the fence. They think maybe we're going into a housing bubble. They're scared about how much they're going to spend. Give them our name and phone number. All my information is just Scott at Scott Grove's team. I'll make sure it's in the comments here as well. And give them our information. We can talk them through getting pre-approved, help them evaluate their finances, help them evaluate their money, make them feel good about what they're earning, make them feel good about what's in their account as far as savings, and just let them know, like, hey, we never want to put anybody in a bad situation where they're overspending. And at this price, at this down payment with your income, you're probably not overspending. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I think we're going to continue to see property values increase. And if they don't, well, then we'll all adjust and we'll do more transactions together and maybe there'll be more supply and less demand and we'll go from there. So Scott Grove's Movement Mortgage, I hope you found this beneficial. And if you have any questions, reach out by Facebook, social media, email, phone number, smoke signal. We'll find a way to help you and your clients. Talk soon. Bye.